Hello, everyone, and I should say welcome to another presentation of Everything I Forgot from Stats class. Today, we continue to talk about qualitative research, which is, as I put it, at one end of the continuum of research tools that we have to do our work. Somewhere in the middle, we have mixed methods, which is a combination of qual and quant, right? However, the researchers should always consider the most appropriate method for the research question. Certain scenarios or a phenomenon is best analyzed with a quant method, others with a qual, and some with a combination of both, thus mixed methods. So last time we looked at the similarities and differences between qual and quant methods. And today we will look in more detail on qualitative research methods under the caption Exploring Qualitative Research Methods in Healthcare Settings. I will be covering 3 areas of qualitative research: case study, that's a qualitative research case study, data collection tools, and trustworthiness. But first, let's recap a few key points from the first presentation to make sure we're on the same page. So the last time, by the way of definition, I mentioned that qualitative research, like other types of scientific research, is strategic and systematic. The last paragraph on this slide highlights the importance of protecting the participants' perspectives of their experiences during the analysis of data and the reporting of the findings from the analysis of the data. We used this picture the last time also. It highlights certain differences between qualitative and quantitative data. While quantitative data is numeric, as in this example, we have 6 individuals awaiting COVID-19 vaccination, 4 of which were females. On the other hand, qualitative data is subjective and seeks to describe the individual's lived experiences. It helps to tell their life stories that led to them standing there in line awaiting vaccination. So last time I mentioned 3 key types of qualitative research methods. Today I will define the ones on this expanded list, and then I will focus on the case study method. And as I define each method, try to think of how each can be used to conduct research in a healthcare setting. And I'll begin with number 1, and I would go counterclockwise, right? So number 1, ethnography. Ethnography is a branch of anthropology, and it's a systematic study of individual cultures. So when you think of this, an understanding of culture does inform us of the health condition of a community or the health condition of an individual, right? With regard to historical method, number 6 there on the list, it's also referred to as historiography, and it seeks to understand how past experiences, events, or individuals affect one's future. And you can see how that definitely would help explain one's health condition today or the availability of healthcare services for a person or for a community. And then we look at the narrative method. This allows people to tell their lived stories. One may use this approach to investigate how different individuals experience the world around them in relation to their health and, again, available healthcare services. And then my favorite, phenomenological design, focuses on the study of an individual's lived experiences within the world, again, perhaps as it relates to their healthcare. And then grounded theory, I think, is the most interesting. And I'm using it in a personal project at the moment. It's a systematic methodology. And I like to mention that there's a difference between methodology and method, but that's perhaps for another discussion. So it's a systematic methodology, not exclusive to qualitative research, right? The methodology involves the construction of hypotheses and theories through the collecting and analysis of data. So as promised, number 2 here, we'll get into the details of what is a case study. In general, it's used in a wide variety of settings. It provides an in-depth, multifaceted understanding of a phenomenon or phenomena in a real-life context where we're looking at the individual patients or a practice or a hospital. Now, I have a second definition here. It's a case study is both the process of learning about the case and the product of our learning. Learning about the case and the product of our learning. I should say, for clarity, that there are various types of case studies. Unlike other qualitative research methods, case study doesn't have a pure social science background. There are mixed methods, case studies, and I have done case studies in business school, maybe referred to as a case report, right? In business school, we call a case study a case report. Now, the goal of case study research is to understand the complexity of a case in the most complete way possible. And so for this reason, case study research often involves the use of multiple methods for collecting data, right? And as mentioned, by using multiple sources of data such as qual and quant, researchers may attain the richest possible understanding of the case. That's the purpose of the case study. But for this presentation, we want to focus a little more on qualitative case study methods. And keep this picture in mind as we go through the different qualitative case studies. Well, before that, the things you should consider when conducting a qualitative case study. The qualitative case study facilitates the exploration of a phenomenon within its context using a variety of data sources to reveal the different facets. And a comprehensive exploration ensures the findings can be looked at from different lenses. In our first presentation, and if you keep the picture I just showed you in mind, we mentioned that the researcher reports the findings of the qualitative research in such a way that another person or another researcher can look at the findings through different lenses. We mentioned that someone should be able to look at the findings from a gender perspective, perhaps from what we refer to as an intersectionality perspective, where you use a gender and perhaps in combination with a socioeconomic perspective. Now, so that's what I mean by looking at the findings through different lenses. With regard to philosophy, I thought long and hard of not including this bullet point in today's presentation, but nevertheless, qualitative researchers base their approach on constructivist paradigm. Now, there are many epistemological approaches to case studies, such as a positivist and an interpretative or a critical paradigm. However, I believe most researchers, when applying a qualitative research case study, adopts what is called the constructivist paradigm, a social construction of reality, right? Social construction of reality, which recognizes the human subjective creation of meaning, allows the participant to tell his or her story. Hence, the close collaboration of researcher and the participant allows the proper understanding of reality. So if that's your philosophy, then a qualitative case study might serve you well, because you're looking at the interaction between the subject and the person conducting the study. Now, when to or when not to use a qualitative case study? You use it when you're answering questions that are looking for how, and why questions. The context is relevant to the phenomenon under study. The phenomenon and context are intertwined. Or when not to, it cannot be used for a control variable or to manipulate the behavior of participants. Now, unit of analysis. What is the specific phenomenon? It could be the patient, nurse, practice, or healthcare system. Also ensure to know what the case will not be covering. That is always important when you're doing any form of research. One professor always reminded me one day that research is not just about what you're looking at, but you should know what you're not looking at. So unit of analysis, once you have determined what your case will be, you will have to consider what your case will not be. It's important that you're clear. It helps as you go forward. So once you have determined that the research question is best answered using a qualitative case study approach, and the case and its boundaries have been determined, then you must consider what type of case study will be conducted. What type of case study? So determine whether you want to describe a phenomenon, explore a phenomenon, or compare between phenomena. And so on this slide here, I present different types of qualitative case study approaches. And I define each approach and give you an example. But I must say early that I took this slide from my graduate school notes, which was a life ago or several lives ago. So the dates on the examples are dated. So definitions and examples of different types of case studies from Baxter and Jock. So we have the explanatory, exploratory, descriptive, and then we can use, of course, multiple case studies. For the explanatory approach, it seeks to explain the presumed causal links in real-life interventions that are too complex for the survey or experimental strategies. And then an example here that I have, which is not a clinical or healthcare related example. Again, this is a dated slide. The researchers analyzed a web-based e-commerce learning community. And you can understand that that's somewhat complex, and a survey or experimental strategies would not do well with this situation. For the exploratory, intervention has no clear outcomes. A good example, an observational study of the development of a nurse-patient relationship. So you're not sure what the outcomes will be. So that would be an exploratory case study, qualitative case study. A descriptive qualitative case study describe an intervention or phenomenon and the real life context in which it occurred. An example, coping with menstruation, understanding the needs of women with Parkinson's disease. So it's descriptive. And then there are times when you want to compare cases. So you use multiple case studies, explore differences within and between cases. The goal is to replicate findings across cases. A good example is innovative community services for rape victims. All right, I also have another example here, which is descriptive in nature. And I included in this slide because it's pertinent to the time we're living in. So this is a COVID contact tracing case on the primary subject of the study, who is Ben, right? So the researchers wanted to know, where did he catch the virus and who did he come in contact with? That's very descriptive, right? So with this data, they can produce an explanation, perhaps come up with a theory. So Ben, a teenager, attends an in-person church service and was unknowingly exposed to COVID-19, right? And you see what happened. See the connections on this slide. So he then unknowingly exposed friends and family members. So very straightforward and clear case study, and it's descriptive. I just wanted to include this to drive the point home on the different types of case study. Again, this is a descriptive case study. So with regard to data collection, we use different methods: participant observation, interviewing, collection of artifacts and text. In a minute, we'll go through the first two in details. So qualitative data collection tools includes observations, interviews. That's not the right type of icon for an interview, but again, observations, interviews, recordings, drawings, journals, email messages, and the responses. Yes, that's true. Informal conversations can also be used in, for example, a case study or an ethnography study where you're involved with the subjects, so you actually living with the subjects. Informal conversations definitely will help you to understand. But today I will focus only on observations and interviews, right? Both rely on the researcher as the primary data collection instrument. So here we will look at observing. And to define, its an emphasis is on understanding the natural environment as lived by the participants without altering or manipulating participants' perspectives. So say there is a need to understand the operations within a particular hospital hospital unit during the night shift. We're trying to understand operations within a hospital unit during the night shift. This is more of a qualitative question to be answered, right? Although, yes, you will be able to collect numeric data like the number of nurses, medication data, and so forth. But the issue here is how you want to look closer at the operations. How is the nurse manager managing the staff and the strategies being used? So only certain research questions are appropriate in this context. And if you ask nursing managers about how they manage a particular hospital unit during the night shift, you run the risk of collecting biased data. Of course, the nursing manager is going to tell you what he or she wants to tell you, right? So observing the hospital setting will allow you to collect firsthand objective data, which can be compared to the participants' perspectives. So participant observation, the observer becomes a participant in the situation being observed. In other words, the researcher spends time during the night shift among the nurses and the nursing manager while observing and collecting data on the activities and setting, right? Depending on the background of the researcher, he or she can be an active participant or a passive participant. So a benefit of observation is that it allows the researcher to gain insights and develop relationships with participants, with the nurses and the nursing manager. However, it runs the risk of losing objectivity, right? And become emotionally involved. The nurse, the researcher who's doing the observation could become emotionally involved with the participants. And if this is the case, it might be best to be a non-participant observer. So in the non-participant approach, the observer is not directly involved in the situation being observed. The researcher observes and collects data, but does not interact. So it might be best not to have an experienced nurse observing the phenomenon we are describing here. Now, with regard to collecting the data, field notes are recommended. Both the participant and non-participant researchers document their observations. And we're getting into the nitty-gritty of observations here, right? So you describe what is directly seen or heard on site. Make note of one's reactions to observations. Recordings may be made after leaving the setting, but as soon as possible. And there's some general guidelines here when you're taking notes: how many nurses and other workers are involved, and what are their roles, what is the physical setting of the hospital unit, and how are the workers situated. Entering the setting without any preconceived idea, any preconceptions is important when you're observing the natural setting. Start slowly. Do not think you have an early understanding of the situation. Document your hunches, questions, and insights. Now, interviewing, the second data collection method I want to go through today, is a purposeful interaction in which one person obtains information from another. Interviewing can be a course of itself. We can't go through the details on how to conduct interviewing in one presentation, but it can be structured or unstructured. But I should read from my slide here. It allows researchers to obtain data on the phenomena that cannot be done through observations, right? So we just described those observations, and interviewing enables the researcher to collect additional data or data that cannot be collected through observations. However, complementary data can be obtained by combining observations and interviews. And typically in a case study, research approach is a combination of interviewing and observation. It allows researchers to probe participants' emotions and perspectives. So when you're conducting an interview, you realize that, well, tell me about this. You mentioned A, tell me about B, and so forth. So then we have structured and unstructured. Structured interview questions can be difficult to compose as you want to stay focused on the issue at hand. You might want to create open-ended questions and pilot test these questions before you, with similar participants before you conduct the actual interview. So unstructured, not based on predetermined questions, but to probe on the subject's experience. Structured, specified set of questions that elicits the same information from respondents. Some quick guidelines here: listen more, talk less. Listening is the most important part of interviewing. Don't interrupt. Learn how to wait. Tolerate silence. It means that participant is thinking. Avoid leading questions. Ask open-ended questions. Keep participants focused and ask for concrete details. Follow up on what participants say and ask questions when you don't understand what they're saying. Don't be judgmental about a participant's views or beliefs. Keep a neutral demeanor. You know, you're interviewing someone and you start to make funny faces or hard faces. That's not good. Don't debate the participants over their responses. You are a recorder of what they're saying. So don't debate. You're not a debater. Other tips: taking notes during interview can be distracting. Writing notes after interview can be difficult to remember the contents. Audio videotaping the interview could work. Make sure your recorder is in good working order. I've seen classmates back in grad school conduct interview to find out at the end that they did not record the interview. Other interview techniques includes focus groups, where you have conversations with an entire group instead of just one person. You have email interviews, and you can use questionnaires, etc. All right, so I want to talk briefly about the trustworthiness in qualitative research. The last time, for first presentation, there were a couple of questions regarding the trustworthiness, and the conversation continues even after today, for sure. I just wanted to touch on a few points. And when talking about trustworthiness in qualitative research, we are talking about validity and reliability, right? The article, well, there's an article I found between our last presentation and today by Lawrence Leon, and I quote directly here from him. It's a good read. I have it in the reference list on the end of this PowerPoint presentation. Trustworthiness has to do with, again, validity and reliability. So what is validity with regard to qualitative research? It means appropriateness of the tools, processes, and data. Appropriateness of the tools, processes, and data. Whether the research question is valid for the desired outcome is important always. The choice of methodology is appropriate for the answering the research question. The design is valid for the methodology. The sampling and data analysis is appropriate. And finally, the results and conclusions are valid in the sample and context. So you're thinking through the entire structure of your research, right? And see whether the methodology is appropriate for the data, for the context, right? You're looking at how you sample your data, how you analyze, and at the end of it, the type of conclusions. So is it really a valid approach? Are you using the right approach to conduct your research? Maxwell provides a list of criteria here, and that helps to ensure validity. And we have the list, the descriptive validity. This refers to the factual accuracy of the account. So qualitative researchers must ensure that they are not distorting anything they see or hear or making up events based on inferences. Think of the nursing setting we just described, the night shift with nursing manager and her supervisees. Or another example, if the research study contains quotations from participants, the researcher must make sure that the quotations are accurate. Interpretive validity refers to the meaning attributed to the behaviors or words of the participants, such as the participants' perspective. You note I've always been emphasizing participants' perspective. So the researcher must interpret the participants' words or actions accurately. For example, a participant may say something fully intended as a joke. If the researcher takes the participant seriously and presents the statement as such in the study, the participant will not be accurately portrayed, right? Then theoretical validity is getting into the philosophy of things, but it refers to how well the research report relates the phenomenon under study to a broader theory. For example, a narrative account about educational change processes, and taking this from my notes in school, and the role of gender and power in these processes should include a discussion of the theoretical constructs involved and application of the theory to other aspects, right? And we mentioned this in part one, where again, the appropriate theoretical lens must be used when reporting the findings from qualitative research. So that's theoretical validity. Then we have generalizability. Now, we have internal generalizability, generalized within the community that has been studied. Can it be applied within the community or a community that's related to this one, somewhat similar? Well, that's external generalizability, where the settings that were not studied by the researcher. Evaluative validity has to do with whether the researcher was objective enough to report the data in an unbiased way without making judgments and evaluations of the data. No account is immune to questions of whether the qualitative researcher was focusing on being evaluative instead of being concerned with describing and understanding the phenomenon under study, right? So these are the things with regard to validity. And I know if it's the first time you're hearing it, you might be saying, what exactly is Tora coming at? But qualitative researchers ensure that all these boxes are checked off. And the goal, again, is to report the verbatim or the pure perspective of the participant. If you're observing, again, a practice or the night shift on a floor within a hospital, how the nursing manager interact with her nurses, then you want to ensure all these boxes are checked to accurately report to whoever you're reporting to, and with regard to the research as you analyze and publish, right? Now, strategies, I'll quickly go through this list. Prolonged participation at the study site. It's important to be there over a certain time in order to understand relationships and to accurately observe what is going on. Persistently observe. Use peer debriefing. So there might be a second observer you can debrief with or not. There might be an experienced researcher you can talk through your findings with. Do you think I was capturing what I should, right? Collect documents, film, videotapes, audio recordings, artifacts, and other raw or slice of life data items. Conduct member checks. Establish structural corroboration or coherence. Establish referential adequacy. Collect detailed descriptive data. Develop detailed descriptions of the context. The list goes on. Establish an audit trail. That must be important, that if somebody wants to go back and look at how you derive your findings, this is what you call an audit trail. Practice triangulation, practice reflexivity. And we can talk about each of these. You can ask questions at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to include these strategies that the qualitative researcher uses in order to ensure validity of their findings. Now, reliability is important, and I'll be brief here on this one. Reliability is the degree to which studied data consistently measure whatever they measure, right? As qualitative researcher examine the results of their inquiry, they should consider whether the data would be collected consistently if the same techniques were utilized over time. And that's important, even in quantitative research. Can we go back and analyze the data and come up with these findings or somewhere within the ballpark? All right, so lastly, as in all research, generalizability is important, right? It refers to the applicability of findings to settings and contexts different from the one in which they were obtained. All right, I've taken you on a journey for this presentation, and I hope I did not overload you with the details of the different methods. If there's another time, I would get into more details about the analysis of the data that you collect through interviewing or observations. And again, just to recap, we defined the different types of qualitative research. Then we zoomed in on case study, and we emphasized qualitative case study. Then we looked at the different types of ways you can collect data for different types of qualitative research methods. And in case study, typically we have interviews and observations and collection of artifacts. Then you have the findings. The next step is to analyze this data, and that's where it gets interesting. And that's what we can talk about perhaps sometime next year, if you're interested. That's what I wanted to present. I just have a table, a chart here to show you, give you an idea of what qualitative data analysis looks like. It's a formidable task. It involves summarizing and a lot of other steps. Thank you. That's what I wanted to share. If you have any questions, I'm willing to attempt to answer your questions. Here's my reference list. I'll stop sharing my slide.